Hello, and welcome to episode 47 of the Sci-Fi Podcast. From Bloomington, Indiana, I'm Nick Zoutra. On today's podcast, I am pleased to welcome Dr. Angela Potochnik, Associate Professor of Philosophy and the Director of the Center for Public Engagement with Science at the University of Cincinnati. Angela's research addresses the nature of science and its successes, the relationship between science and the public, and methods in population biology. She considers science to be the study of our world as it is in its messy reality. Nonetheless, according to Angela, science requires idealization to function. If we are to attempt to understand our world, we have to find ways to reduce its complexity. In her new book, Idealization and the Aims of Science, Angela shows just how crucial idealization is to science and why it matters. Beginning with the acknowledgement of our status as limited human agents trying to make sense of an exceedingly complex world, Angela moves to explain how science aims to depict and make use of causal patterns, a project that makes essential the use of idealization. She offers case studies from a number of branches of science to demonstrate the ubiquity of idealization, shows how causal patterns are used to develop scientific explanations, and describes how the necessarily imperfect connection between science and truth leads to researchers' values influencing their findings. The resulting book is a tour de force, a synthesis of the study of idealization that also offers countless new insights and avenues for future exploration. And thus, without further ado, let's bring in Angela. Dr. Angela Potochnik, welcome to the Sci-Fi Podcast. How are you this afternoon?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Thanks. Thanks for sitting down to chat. How is it out there in Cincinnati?
It is shockingly, suddenly cool and fall-like, and overcast.
Yeah. Same here in Bloomington. It is overcast. I'm looking out the window right now. It has been raining for the past couple days, and we're only about 2 hours away from one another, I think, distance-wise. So cool. Well, great. Well, again, thanks for coming on. How are things been going with you this semester so far?
The semester is flying by, but I guess going well. I'm teaching. I'm in the sort of fun position of teaching only a graduate seminar right now, and then I have some sort of out of classroom projects that I'm focused on, and so that's actually been a ton of fun, and I'm learning a lot. So
nice. What class are you teaching?
Yeah. So I'm calling it complexity, and so Ooh. I think it's a little bit of a funny way of structuring a focus in philosophy of science, but it's definitely a grad seminar in philosophy of science, but it's contingent to maybe contiguous with lots of other maybe more common focuses. Touches things like levels of organization, emergence, reductionism. There's lots swirling about that's sort of more traditional, but I think I'm finding myself with sort of a cross section of topics and authors that I think is a little bit unusual. So far I've learned a ton, and it's just been fun.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I would love to sit in on that class. That sounds very interesting. Have you found it a challenge to bring together a number of these kind of similar but disparate phenomena related to complexity, like as you mentioned, levels and other things?
Slightly. So far I'm really happy with how the trajectory of the course has been working. But, it's definitely like a seminar that I most wanted to take versus the one maybe that I was most well positioned to teach. So in that sense, it was challenging to try to figure out how to create a trajectory, right, that sort of is coherent and makes sense. And I leaned a lot on my colleague, Tony Shamero, who I think of as sort of a great resource in some of these related issues. And he was great in sort of helping me piece it together.
Great. So you guys all, Tony, I've also spoken with Tony as well. So, and Tom.
Okay.
So it seems like quite a few folks from Cincinnati. Are you guys all in the philosophy department? there?
We're all in the philosophy department. Tony is also shared with psychology, but
Okay.
but yes, also in philosophy. And so we are, it's something like a decade ago, I think, or maybe actually longer at this point because time continues to pass. When John Bickel was department head here,
Yeah.
there was a
Oh,
decision made to focus on what we think of as philosophy of the life sciences, which includes, biology as well as psychology and cognitive sciences.
yeah.
And so, I mean, we're sort of unbelievably focused in that particular area. My favorite quick example to trot out is my colleague Zvi Wiener, who's our modern philosopher, and he does, of course, Galileo and Newton, as any modern philosopher does, right? So anyway, so we're very sciencey.
Cool. And I see here that you are currently the director of the Center for Public Engagement with Science. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is a new thing, and I still feel the impulse to like add scare quotes when I claim this center in the title. But
Right, sure.
but you want it to be so, and this is how these things happen, right? You will them to be so, and then somehow along the way they become real. So yeah, I guess about a year ago, I got some initial college buy-in for, I should say, Tom Polger, who's our department head currently, and I got some initial college buy-in for starting something like this. And I'm just really excited about it. And it's taking a lot of my love and attention at this point. So thinking about this as the title suggests, something that really is about public engagement with science. So philosophy is nowhere in the title.
Right.
But I think that it's something pretty interesting and potentially powerful to have sort of a broad umbrella approach to public engagement with science that's centered in, I mean, on our campus, this part isn't even to be taken for granted, centered in the College of Arts and Sciences, centered in humanities and in philosophy, I think could be really fun. So I've been busy trying to figure out what already is going on around campus and how to sort of end in the local community and trying to sort of position this initiative in the right way among all of those things.
Yeah. So I imagine, as director, you have quite a few decisions to make, and in deciding, what is the center going to be about? That's great. And so, have there been any initial thoughts as to what you hope to or aim to do? Like, are there any events or things happening this year?
Yeah, actually there are. So one kind of deceptively simple thing that we're doing, but I actually think it's going to end up being really fun and important in a sort of local campus way, is we're coordinating a reading group right now on Adrian Curry's new book, which I happen to have right here, this one, Rock, Bone, and Ruin, An Optimist's Guide to the Historical Sciences. And so the reading group is pretty thoroughly interdisciplinary. We have people there from our anthropology department, our geology department, someone who works on evolutionary medicine at Children's Hospital in Cincinnati. Of course, philosophers. I'm forgetting some fields. We have a historian who works on history of archaeology. He'll be joining us. So it really sort of brings together a group of people who, a cross section of people who you wouldn't normally get into a room necessarily. Yep. And they're there to read and think hard about what a philosopher of science has to say about some specific sort of set of issues that they deal with in their work. And so far, it's really been nice. And then we'll have Adrian visit. Mm-hmm. And when he visits, he will give a public talk at a really interesting gem of a private library called the Mercantile Library in downtown Cincinnati. I actually gave a talk on my book this last spring, and it went really well. So Adrian will give a public-facing talk and then also do sort of campus events, again, kind of across departments.
Great.
So sort of a simple kind of thing, but I think what's interesting in it, I think, is getting together, like I said, a sort of interesting combination of scientists, broadly construed, and philosophers, and sort of covertly directing them to read more philosophy of science.
Great. I am all for that. All right. Well, we can hear a little bit more about that. Maybe we can touch back on the center and some of its other actions later in the part of this interview. But why don't we take a step back and hear a little bit more about how you got into philosophy of science in the first place? So Angela, why don't you start with telling us where did you grow up? Yeah, so I am from Arkansas. I feel the need to clarify that by saying that my parents moved to Arkansas in their adulthood as part of the Back to the Land movement. So they moved to Arkansas because land was cheap, and they
sort of built a house out of hand tools and lived off the grid for the first few years of my life. So that's an unusual way to be from Arkansas, but I'm from Arkansas.
Cool. Where in Arkansas?
I grew up in Northwest Arkansas, so Rogers, which is should be famous for being the first Walmart that ever existed, was in my hometown. Wow. And it's directly next door to sort of the town that has been totally reshaped by having the Walmart corporate headquarters there. Oh,
that's where Walmart is located. Okay.
Yes.
Or headquartered. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what was it like growing up in Arkansas? What kinds of, interests or things were you up to?
What was it like growing up in Arkansas? I was a runner from a pretty young age through college, through the end of college, really, and a little bit past that. What else to say? I don't know. What is it like growing up in Arkansas? So Northwest Arkansas is funny in that unusual for Arkansas in that it is hilly and it is sort of has actually a pretty long tradition, not just limited to Walmart, of sort of supporting businesses. And so it's not sort of farming focused as a lot of the state, actually, what we call the Delta is. And it actually is this little tiny segment of Arkansas that was part of the Union during the Civil War. So anyway, weird things about the ways in which I grew up with Arkansas is, I guess, the theme here.
Okay, sure. What were your parents up to at the time?
So I am technically, I guess, a first-generation college graduate anyway. Okay. I mentioned that my parents moved to Arkansas as part of the Back to the Land movement. They were thoroughly hippies. And my dad has been, until he retired, he was self-employed as a general contractor for construction, mainly focused on residential homes. And then my mom did a sort of number of different things, but it's maybe sort of loosely best construed as kind of construction management activities. Okay, great. Partly with my dad, but then also in a more traditional job at the same time. Okay.
And so you said you were interested in running, or you were a runner for a long time. Did you do like run in school, track, things like that?
Yeah, track and cross country. Cool. Competed pretty seriously. Like I said, through college, and that although college was a Division III program, so.
Ooh, wow.
Serious, but not really serious.
Okay. All right. Well, when did philosophy come into your life? At what point was that?
I mean, kind of stereotypically, I think, when I got to college, I realized that there was a thing called philosophy. And I went to college as, it's definitely a big part of my self-identity, this sort of being from the South, in some sense, even if not the proper South. Maybe it makes it even feel like a bigger deal in that sense. And being
it's not the proper South?
Something like that. I mean, it's getting towards the West, right? I don't know. I don't have anything intelligent to say about the ways in which it is or isn't. But it's not sort of, I don't know that like debutante balls were a big thing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, sure. Gotcha. They're like, well, when you hear the South and like, I don't know, there are these kinds of things that are very specific. Yeah. Right. It's kind of bleeding into the Midwest. So, well, it's not the Midwest, but it's different kind of South.
But yeah. Right, okay. Exactly.
I'm from the Southwest. I know nothing about this. So I'm just curious. Yeah. So I think those things, especially I think sort of geography, sort of differential access to educational resources is, I think, something that maybe doesn't get as much attention as it might. So I went to college thinking I wanted to be pre-med because we had no models for I at least didn't have access to any models for sort of being a professional other than being a doctor or a lawyer, right? So you sort of chose, am I going to be a doctor or a lawyer? And so it showed up to college thinking that I was pre-med and starting out as a chemistry major. And actually through my involvement in the cross-country team, met another philosophy major who was a junior, who is now a professional philosopher, Emily Austin, who's at Wake Forest and does ancient. And through talking to her on long runs, I sort of got captured by philosophy and realized for how deeply interesting it was. Really? Wow. Can you recall any of those early conversations or those early ideas that were particularly interesting?
I'm sure they were painfully embarrassing and stereotypical. I'm sure it was sort of free will and mind and I don't know what else, that sort of stuff.
So yeah, it would be interesting if we could get a bunch of philosophers to be just completely transparent. What were those initial questions? And then once you become a real philosopher, then it's like those questions are you're like, no, that's embarrassing what I was actually interested in.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
And it's like, come on, like I understand now that we are, matured, but some of those questions are still pretty fascinating. Well, cool. So
that's a good point.
Yeah. Okay. So was it at this, and where was the undergrad again?
So this is a liberal arts college in Arkansas called Hendrix College, spelled like Jimi Hendrix is spelled.
Okay.
It's an absolutely wonderful place. Okay. It's something like 1,200 people, or at least was back then. And we had 3.5 philosophy faculty, right? So 3 full-time and 1 who did other things as well elsewhere in the college. But at least during the time that I was there, we cranked out just an unbelievable number of philosophy majors who became professional philosophers. So it's this really funny thing. I won't be able to give all the names, but I think I do know something like 10 to 12 professional philosophers who were at this tiny little college, sometime in the sort of 2 years before I got there to the 2 years after I was there.
Yeah. Wow. So what was it? Can you describe what was it about this learning environment that could have produced this many number of professional philosophers?
That's a really great question. So honestly, who knows? I'm speculating entirely here, but
causal speculation.
If it isn't related to the sort of stuff I'm talking about, that Hendrix absolutely drew students from around the country, but a lot of us, maybe 2/3 of us, if memory serves, were from either Arkansas or a state directly adjacent to Arkansas. Is maybe even more than that. And I wonder if, I don't know, I wonder if you get sort of more students staying in state. This was sort of, the top in-state private college option, really. I think that's an uncontroversial thing to say. And I wonder if you get sort of compared to maybe other states with a greater number of higher education institutions and greater perceived access to sort of elite schools, I wonder if you don't have that same sort of effect.
Sure.
So I don't know. I wonder if that's part of it, but this is all conjectural. I have no idea, of course.
Right. Okay.
And then it was fun, right? I mean, it's a liberal arts college environment, and our professors would challenge us and engage us and talk to us out of class, and we would, talk philosophy on our downtime among ourselves as well. So it's sort of in the air.
Nice. So was it at this point you switched things up from pre-med to philosophy?
Yeah. I don't think I made it through my first year as a chemistry major. I really liked that as well, but this is, I think, now that I understand more about science, probably this was not a good inference, but after my maybe second college chemistry course, I sort of felt like I could extrapolate to kind of what you could do beyond that. It's sort of, I could see how it would get more complicated, but it kind of seemed a little more the same. And philosophy, in contrast, it felt like I could never sort of see around the corner. And it was also the most difficult coursework that I had, right? So sort of my philosophy courses just threw me for a loop, and it felt like I couldn't, I could never say for sure sort of how well I was doing or if I was making sense of things. And that was really appealing.
Cool. All right. So you're considering medicine and then philosophy. Was it this time that you thought being a professional philosopher was what you wanted to do, or were there other interests as well?
I've never been accused of sort of thinking too far ahead about plans in general. And so I think the honest answer is I imagined, once I knew that I wasn't going into med school, the obvious alternative seemed to be grad school. And so the question became sort of in what discipline did I want to go to grad school for? So this was actually a question for me as late as maybe my junior year, where the main contenders were psychology or philosophy. I also did a significant amount of coursework in psychology. And I'll name drop another professional philosopher who was a Hendrix undergrad, Sarah Robbins, who was my roommate at Hendrix and also a philosophy major there. Ended up being a psychology and philosophy double major, and she's now faculty at University of Kansas.
Oh, great.
Also very interesting philosopher of science and works on memory. Anyway, sorry, I'm distracting myself.
No, this is
So I had a sense, that I would go to grad school, and then sort of decided among, I had interest in social sciences. That's a great thing about a liberal arts education, right? Is I was learning all the things, and at some point I think made a decision to focus in on philosophy because of I want to say our methodology, but I suppose I should say sort of the lack thereof, right? So I thought as far as going to grad school in philosophy, and then once I was in grad school, right, then it occurs to me, wait a minute, I guess if you go to grad school in philosophy, I guess that means you're trying to be a professor in philoscy.
Supposedly, but I mean, not necessarily, especially not now. But yeah. Okay, all right, and so all right. So so it looks like working. Where did you do your graduate work?
So I went to grad school at Stanford then.
Fantastic.
Directly when I finished my undergrad work at Hendrix. And I think was very lucky from what I know now in being able to make that transition from this tiny college with a very small philosophy faculty to a relatively well-known,
absolutely
strong PhD program. But yeah, and I came to Stanford kind of at a funny time too. It was, I think, maybe the year prior to me getting there, or right when I arrived, Michael Friedman, who eventually became one of my two advisors, had joined the faculty. And then I visited, so I was already interested in possibly some work with Michael Friedman, or possibly Elliot Sober was another name that was high on my list. And I went to visit Wisconsin. And on that visit, Elliot said, don't make your decision based on me. I don't know where I'll be. And in fact, he came to Stanford the same time I did.
Wow.
So it was a funny sort of point of transition, but it worked out at that point entirely in my favor as far as the great people who
both having Friedman and Sober to help to advise must have been great. Yeah. So how was overall though? Yeah, what was life like as a graduate student at Stanford?
It was good. I think it was a pretty friendly place to be. I think that there actually were some other women philosophy students, which is not to be taken. I think especially how long ago was that now? 16 years ago, maybe when I started, wasn't to be taken for granted. And it seemed like a welcoming place. I really enjoyed sort of getting a sense of how a department works. And sort of observing faculty and their interactions, as well as sort of, getting involved with my fellow graduate students in various regards. There was also a pretty influential, I mentioned a couple of my mentors already, but there was also a pretty influential group of graduate students in philosophy of science who were already there when I showed up. People who worked primarily in philosophy of biology. Peter Godfrey Smith was also there when I arrived, as well as Michael Strevens. They left shortly after, both of them. Wow. But Patrick Forwer, Michael Weisberg, Ken Reisman, there were a number of graduate students who were working on philosophy of biology who I could sort of fall in with. And again, the theme here being that I don't overthink things. There were a lot of people doing interesting stuff in philosophy of biology. I was like, oh, that sounds fun. Let's see what philosophy of biology is like.
Okay. Yeah. So what kinds of philosophical questions in the philosophy of science were you engaged in at the time?
Oh boy, that's a hard question. What was I thinking about?
I mean, it might be. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember being in grad school, towards the end of grad school, and coming across a paper that I wrote as an undergrad, and being sort of shocked at the degree of continuity between that and the stuff that I was thinking about in grad school. So I guess that sort of is a way of me getting back into the frame of mind that I had at that time. I was really interested. Well, what brought me, I can't believe I missed this part of the story. Why I became a professional philosopher.
Okay. This is
question, good. I answered it wrongly. I became a professional philosopher because I fell in love with the Vienna Circle. So I had a cool scholarship at my, fun liberal arts college where I got to spend a summer basically designing an independent project. And I spent, with the encouragement of one of my philosophy professors, I spent 8 weeks in Vienna researching the history of logical empiricism, and then went to Oxford for some follow-up research. And
Oh, wow.
really just dove into it and loved it. And I thought that's what I was going to do. I thought I was going to do history of logical empiricism. And that's sort of how I, again, became interested in Michael Friedemann and Elliot Sober's work, is through that lens, actually. And so sort of questions about science that they were asking then that continued to get airtime subsequently were things that I was really focused on. So questions about the unity of science, what that would mean, and whether it occurs, right?
Yeah.
And questions about I guess sort of related questions around reductionism, and starting into questions around explanation and the sort of stuff that I think about now.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So it was those questions, and I imagine the time in Vienna was pretty exciting as well. Doing that study.
It was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I mean, I really was sort of out on my own, right? I rented a little student apartment and read on my own, and I timed my trip to coincide with one of the Institute Wiener Kreis workshops that they have. And it was on Unity of Science, and Elliot was one of the teachers for it. But in retrospect, it's absolutely ridiculous. But it never even occurred to me to try to apply to formally be part of the workshop. And I was an undergraduate, but I think that's not sort of outside the bounds of
Sure.
what's occurred. But it never occurred to me. So I sort of...
Was this their summer workshop or no? Or
yeah.
The Visu or whatnot? Yeah, okay.
I'm not sure. Yeah,
it might be. They have another one now. It's like an annual thing, but it could be a different from.
Yeah, no, it's the same series, I think. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
So I wasn't formally enrolled in that, but I would like show up to the Institute guys like after their meetings and like read all the same stuff. Anyway,
that's great.
It was very sort of independent.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no. Well, that's got to be exciting. And yeah, just being there where things took place. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Absolutely.
All right. And so in asking these kinds of questions, being generally interested in this, did you direct your dissertation to be more of like a history of philosophy project, or what did you end up doing?
So I was right at the point, I guess, at the end of my second year in grad school of deciding whether I would dive into the philosophy biology end of things or a history of logical empiricism kind of project. And all at the same time, Elliot decided to go back to Wisconsin, and I decided I wanted to work on more Elliot-like things, more contemporary philosophy of science, philosophy of biology. And so I saw a fork in the road and decided to move towards a sort of contemporary philosophy of science and especially focus on biology, despite this sort of love of the history of logical empiricism that brought me to philosophy in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Was there anything, can you recall kind of like what was motivating you to sort of make the shift toward philosophy of biology and kind of contemporary philosophy of science?
No, actually, I don't even think that there's an answer there. I have a very clear memory of there being this fork in the road decision point, and I think it was just a sort of bare introspection of like, sort of gut check. Like, how do you feel when you?
Gotcha. Yeah. It's just like
it felt like
feels
like
better.
the direction I wanted to go.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Great. Well, okay. And so, what was the general project? What did you end up doing as sort of your first big work, if it was the dissertation or not? I'm just curious, kind of like what was like maybe your first paper that you really, were proud of, got some traction from, etc.
Yeah. All right. So if we think about it in terms of paper, I think what I'd want to say is I ended up taking an independent study, a directed reading, with another graduate student, Audrey Yap, and on, what did we think of it as? Something related to the history of logical empiricism. And I can't remember now what the theme was, but we ended up reading Gallison's pretty well-known work on Aufbau Bauhaus and those sort of social connections between a Carnapian picture of sort of, of Aufbau and the Bauhaus movement at the same time, and that were, historically the people were in the Vienna Circle were giving guest talks at the Bauhaus, etc. And then we were also working through some of Ubel's work on Neurath, and we both sort of just became convinced that the more Galison-style work in locating the Vienna Circle in this sort of broader social cultural context was using like a sort of Carnap lens on the Vienna Circle. And of course, there were tons of different views among the members of the circle. And Otto Neurath has a sort of, I think, particularly interesting and compelling set of views from a modern standpoint that you really have to sort of work back through how that set of ideas fit with the sort of social cultural moment that the Vienna Circle was at historically.
Nice.
So that was a kind of motivation for the project, and the actual paper that Audrey and I worked on together, and that eventually was our I think both of our first publications, was sort of working back through the Bauhaus connections in particular, from a Neurath perspective, showing that the Galison analysis didn't work and that we needed to sort of think really differently about sort of what Aufbau means, to bring into play ideas from. So
what Neurath. Does it mean, or what do you think?
Oh boy. Gosh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to recapture that on the spot. And embarrassingly, I don't have to go back to grad school to do it. I only have to go back a year or so, 2 years ago, from my most recent History of Logical Empiricism grad seminar, but I still can't remember.
That's
let's see. Okay, so the Carnap view that Galison makes a big deal about is this sort of logical stepwise construction out of that renders the whole sort of transparent in some literal or metaphorical sense, depending on what we're talking about, from sort of logically simple elements. And so there are certain ways in which you can, I imagine, immediately hear how this sounds like Carnap's Der Logiker Aufbau der Welt, Die Logiker Aufbau der Welt. But it doesn't fit at all comfortably with the Neurathian Ballungen, right, is the term that I think Nancy Cartwright's work and Jordi Katz's work maybe sort of brought into the fore of these, literally that translates as congestions, which are supposed to be these necessarily ambiguous and vague terms that sort of anchor the whole project of science. So there's a way in which that sort of flies in the face of this idea of transparent construction from simple elements. So what's the alternative? We saw, we had two different terms for Aufbau, and I don't, or two different sort of versions of it that we termed, coined terms for, and I can't remember what terms we used. I think maybe we emphasized that for Neurath, that there's more of a sort of procedural versus conceptual sense of Aufbau, where there's a kind of active. I'm just making stuff up now. Sorry.
I'm having to just Google this and try to make sense of it myself. So yeah. Okay. The construction. Yeah. So the general thought is it a principle of building up in some kind of way? Is that anything to do?
That's what I started to say. Yes.
Okay. All right.
But I'm not sure how to work it out for Neurath in particular.
Right.
So I gave up.
Okay. Well, no, it sounds fascinating. The work sounds very interesting. And so, yeah, so this was, I imagine. Fun. Yeah. Very cool. Okay, great.
And so Neurath keeps making guest appearances, sort of in work that I do along the way. He never disappears.
Yeah. So if you had a student or someone else who was interested in, or you're trying to convince, like, doing some history of logical empiricism is I think a really great project, or a really a great effort to do for if you want to be a modern philosopher of science. What would you tell them?
This is maybe an indirect way of answering that question. The following thing has happened both times I've taught a graduate seminar in history of logical empiricism. I have 1 to 3 students who come in knowing a ton of Quine. And their frame of mind when they come to the seminar is, I know my Quine. Quine was like deeply inspirational. So I need to understand the recent philosophical history that he was sort of responding to, and in some sense, sort of correcting for,
Sure.
in order to really have my Quine in hand. And by the end, they recognize that, sort of the path towards the Quinean views that they love were in many important respects, that path was sort of already well established with the earlier work, especially with Neurath's work. And then they're a little bit indignant about why they never knew that Neurath had a lot of these ideas before Quine did.
Sure.
So I love that. So I think that, if you can go, I don't know how many years it would be, not many, right? 2 decades back further, in the very recent history of philosophy, and gain sort of additional perspective on contemporary philosophical ideas. Why not? So another feature of that, of sort of that moment in philosophical history that I love, is it's also a point at which the philosophical ideas were really interestingly and self-consciously intertwined with the social and sort of cultural moment that they were located at. So another course that I coincidentally taught the same semester I most recently taught my History of Logical Empiricism grad seminar was an undergrad honors course that I co-taught with a historian here on the sort of really social and cultural and intellectual history from that, sort of 2-decade period, really, when the Vienna Circle were at work. And it's so amazing when you look at what was going on architecturally in music, in visual and literary arts, politically. First of all of these people are talking to each other and sort of self-consciously up to the same thing. And second of all, it almost becomes predictable what sort of radical change will happen in any of these different arenas.
Yeah.
Once you start to get a feel for what's going on more generally across the different areas. And it's really fun because that's sort of accounting for philosophical ideas is so contrary to most of what we do in our field, right? You have an idea because you're responding to an earlier philosophical idea, and sort of exploring new logical space. And it seems like a lot of times we think of this as sort of this that the progress in our field can be thought about, purely in terms of philosophical exchanges, versus, it almost seems like it would be an insult in our field to say, that philosopher thought so-and-so because of what was going on in art at that time, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm making that point very, very clearly, but it's a kind of sort of explanation that's not sort of simply in terms of the ideas in a way that I think is unusual in our field.
Right. We tend to have an internalist focus for sure. Yeah. Okay, great. So in working on this, was this a project that you was working, and this particular paper, was this something that was going on during your graduate work or recently out of graduate work, or?
Yeah, that was when I was a graduate student, and maybe prior to starting my dissertation.
Okay, cool. So,
memory serves.
Okay, yeah, sure. So, what was it like in kind of transitioning as a graduate student to the professorship? Like, how did that come about?
Okay, so I'm warning you that I need to warn you, I'm not seeing you very well, so I didn't quite get that.
Oh,
question.
Sorry.
I'm not sure if there's anything we should do to.
Sorry. So basically, just like, what was it like? What was the transition for you from graduating from Stanford and getting your first job?
Yeah. Okay. So I accidentally ended up in a relatively nice situation of completely finishing the dissertation and defending it, and I guess getting the PhD, and still being at Stanford for another year while I applied for jobs. Mm-hmm. And so that was, I think, in retrospect, did a lot to make the transition a lot more comfortable. I had a sort of year to teach a couple of courses, think about the next step, start working some of my dissertation into independent papers, et cetera. So I was able to kind of take that slowly in a way that I think a lot of times circumstances don't permit. So that helped a lot. And then I think I maybe, so I went into a tenure track job from grad school, and I think I was maybe the last year of people on the market where that was an outcome that happened basically at all.
Sure.
Of course, I'm exaggerating, but I was sort of right at that transition point where I think with the economic downturn and all the rest, the job market started tightening up even more than it had been previously.
Yeah. So it was, so I imagine, so fortunate that, so you spent another year and ended up, it looks like, teaching at Oklahoma State. Is that right? That's
right. Yes. Landed at Oklahoma State. And was there for a couple of years.
Okay. And how was the time at Oklahoma?
Tell you about Oklahoma? Is that the question?
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
I'm still having.
Yeah, sorry. If the connection is, we can. Is the connection still a little oof? Okay. Yeah, it's a little. Okay. Yeah, tell me a little bit about Oklahoma. What was it like at Oklahoma?
Okay. What was it like in Oklahoma? My job at Oklahoma State was a very good first job to have in the sense that it was not. What to say? I don't know. So I left. Sorry, I'm bumbling. What to say about Oklahoma?
Oh, that's okay.
Stillwater is a funny place. I'm starting again entirely.
Yeah.
Stillwater is a funny place. It is halfway between Tulsa and Oklahoma City, and it is. It's a very flat place, and college football is, I think, maybe the main thing happening.
Right.
So it was interesting. And I mean, to be honest, I never fully moved my life to Oklahoma State.
Okay.
I had met who's now my husband shortly before leaving San Francisco, and he stayed there. And so for the time that I was in Oklahoma, I spent a lot of my non-teaching time back
visiting.
In San Francisco.
Sure. I can understand that. That's a very common among those in the academy is to kind of solve that two-body problem. That's tough. But okay. Well, and so you spent a little bit of time there as for a first job, and then ultimately it looks like that you were there for, how long were you there for? A few years?
Yeah, I was there for 2 years.
Okay.
And then found my job that I have now at the University of Cincinnati. And they were generous here in letting me sort of have a slow start. And so I actually went back to California. I was a visiting fellow, I think maybe my title was, at the Michelle Clayman Institute for Gender Studies, actually at Stanford, and was able to sort of work on some of the threads I hadn't explored in my research that relate to feminist philosophy of science. And then made my way over to Cincinnati by spring quarter, sometime in the early 2010s.
Yeah. Cool. All right. And so yeah, it's been a little bit. We've had both Tom Polger and Tony Shamero on the podcast. They've spoken very highly of Cincinnati, the program, et cetera. What's it like over there? What's your experience?
It's a lot of fun, I think. I believe in our sort of scrappy little department and program. I already mentioned that we focus on philosophy of the life sciences, and my colleagues are very sciencey, and in general sort of have great colleagues. And we have a small PhD program, but we have really great students, and certainly not exclusively, but a good number of our students, as you'd imagine, end up working on philosophy of science. And in a way that I think is really interesting and valuable, and something that I didn't do, which is a lot of our students end up with significant graduate coursework in one or more sciences along the way, and a surprising number with a master's degree in a field of science.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's really fun, and it's actually something that is valuable for faculty as well, right? So I have met faculty in some science departments and gotten a better sense of what's going on in some science departments because of our students, which is very cool.
Nice. Excellent. All right. Well, so since we're kind of up to date with, I guess, current, your current position, why don't we chat a little bit about some of your favorite works, some of your favorite projects? I see, like, you have on your website, you have a number of a pretty broad and well-connected research program covering things like scientific explanation, relations among scientific projects and fields, social factors in science, as well as the history of logical empiricism that we've mentioned, and methodology of population biology. So are there any, maybe like one or two papers that you'd like to share with us that you felt are kind of telling of your career as a philosopher of science?
Well, can I talk about my book? I want to talk about my book.
You want to just go to the book? Okay, I was going to come to the book, so we're definitely let's talk about the book. Let's talk about the book.
I'm proud of my book. That's
let's
sort
do
of
it.
Where,
Okay, so
where it all comes
Dr.
together.
Potochnik has a new book, Idealization and the Aims of Science. This is the book, right? Yeah. Okay. That's the book. Let's focus on the book. Cool.
So I mean, I said that and sort of went that direction because, well, first of all, it's been, occupying a whole bunch of my research attention since, it's easy for me to remember dates on this one, actually, because I started that book project after my first daughter was born, and I signed the contract for the book and submitted, I think, the final manuscript, like 2 weeks before my other daughter was born. So the dates are easy to remember. So anyway, so this has been my main thing that I've been thinking about, from 2013 until it came out about a year ago, going on a year ago now. But then the other reason it came to mind is, I joked, I was giving a talk last week at Pitt, and I joked that someone asked me to give a talk that was on something other than my book. I said, but all of my ideas are in my book. Like,
okay.
I suspect that's not like how the recommended way to write a book, but my book has all of my ideas.
That's wonderful.
Relatively ambitious, sort of walk through a lot of different things. So intentionally so. So I didn't write a book until I got tenure, but immediately after getting tenure, I sort of turned to that. And what I wanted to do, I had, as you mentioned quickly already, I have, I think, a number of different strands of interests. In use of models and sort of what we should take seriously and what we can and can't learn for the use of from the use of models in population biology, some different ideas about explanation, connections among fields, as you mentioned, among different fields of science and more generally among different projects in science, and then the role of social factors in science, right? So I had the feeling that all of these things, as much as it seemed like sort of different strands of research, that all of these things, I was sort of, finding different ways into kind of one basic point about science, it felt like. And I really wanted to take the time with Book Length Project to sort of piece those things together and tease out how it fit together, what the view was.
Yeah.
And so that's how I found my way into the project. And it didn't, I had a project before I knew this part. It was sort of a discovery that I decided that the centerpiece to that really was an emphasis on the role of idealization in science. And then once you had that, I think that all of the things I had been saying in these different philosophical debates about science sort of, were carried through, pretty naturally.
Yeah.
And then also as probably tends to happen, I then thought that I would just say what other people think about idealization and then make the points that I knew I had to make. But it turned out, right, once I started digging, wait a minute, no, I actually think something different here. So then there was sort of positive philosophical work, it seemed, to do there as well.
Okay. So it looks like, So, yeah, according to your view, you motivate a strong view of idealization, centrality to science. So, can you characterize your strong view for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's strong in a few different regards. So, my phrase that I end up using pretty regularly, but deploy pretty intentionally in the book is that idealizations, I think, are rampant and unchecked. So rampant in the sense that I think it's hard to look at a scientific product without coming up with something that rests on idealized assumptions. So I think, right, idealization's just everywhere. And then the unchecked part maybe is philosophically a meatier idea in that I think a lot of ink has been spilled over sort of how we can make good on the existence of these idealizations in various places, right? So to choose one recent and well-known example, Michael Weisberg has his paper, and eventually it found its way into his book, where he says, look, philosophers have had all of these different ideas about idealizations, right? Maybe idealizations are temporary steps, right? And then you de-idealize, try to get more realistic whenever you can. Or, others have thought maybe you idealize in order to zero in on the most important causal factors. And then still others say you can idealize when you have different modeling approaches that employ different idealizations, right? And so the work, part of the work of that paper is to say, this is of Michael Weisberg's paper, right, is to say, well, why not all of these, right? Why not? Sometimes you're doing the first, sometimes you're doing the second, sometimes you're doing the third. So I actually think that idealizations play lots of these different roles at the very same time, right? So sometimes, often, an idealization, an idealized assumption is worth making because it simplifies the matter, simplifies the problem. It's also mathematically expedient. And also, right, it doesn't mess up the representation too much, right? That's sort of a quick way to make the point. So I phrase this as there being, I think, not different kinds of idealizations, but rather intertwined reasons to idealize. Okay. And I think the end result is, as I said, I think idealizations are everywhere in science. It's hard to find any scientific work that doesn't rely crucially on them. And then second, that I think that the details play out in different ways in different kinds of science, I think, but I think that not a lot of effort, scientific effort, is usually spent trying to figure out sort of how to justify idealized assumptions. That it's more often something like, well, it works, right? It works to assume the following false thing, and so we'll go with it, something like that. So this is the idea that idealizations are, I think, in various ways unchecked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can see now as from the overview that you seem to weave a number of different things here, including your accounts of explanation that can work with your view of idealizations, how then values in science can account for this as well, or talk about this. So what are, if you were to describe some of the key takeaways from the book, if we were to accept a number of your claims, what is the results? What's the significance?
Yeah, I think most basically, the point that I want to make in a lot of different, in the context of a lot of different philosophical debates in that book, is that even as we philosophers of science have started to take more seriously the ways in which a human influence is felt on science, we sort of haven't updated our philosophical theories in a number of different sort of debates about science accordingly, right? So put in a positive way instead, that the ways in which the practitioners of science in general and in their sort of idiosyncrasies as individuals, let me start that sentence again. Okay. that the practitioners of science in general, and sort of including also idiosyncrasies that individuals bring to the table, that ends up crucially influencing the nature of science, right? The nature of what a successful explanation is, what idealization should be made and in what circumstances, and then ultimately, right, is sort of one of the main themes of the book, the nature of our scientific understanding, right? The ways in which we understand the world, what we understand about the world.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Wow. Okay. All right. And so how has the book been received so far? I see you have a couple of book reviews up on the site.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm certainly happy. I sort of had the nightmare of like the really mean, devastating NDPR review or something, right? that would make me embarrassed.
Right.
The ongoing imposter syndrome.
Sure.
But so I've been really happy. It seems like people have had nice things to say about it, but more importantly, I've had lots of opportunities so far to talk with people about the book and the ideas in the book, and it's really fun. I mean, it's such a privilege to be able to spend a lot of time and work, sort of carefully crafting something that you think is true, and then have smart people engage with it. It's just amazing.
Yeah, yeah. So did you think, I mean, is this something like, well, I guess I can ask, like, so, you've been really excited to talk about this book. You've written a bunch of papers and have weaved your ideas. Was there something about crafting your ideas into this kind of coherent piece that you found was, I don't know, that is more meaningful to you, or a better way of communicating? Like, I don't know, what is it about doing this book that has been so exciting for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think maybe what I'd want to say more than anything else is related to what I just said about how I feel about the book's reception, which is with a paper, you have to bracket so much and sort of position what you want to say in such a way so that the maximum number of people with the maximum number of different views about other things can sort of come to the table and say, aha, I see what this little point is that you want to make here. Okay, right? Or here's
Sure.
what's wrong with it and falling apart, right? So you're sort of, a paper benefits from being sort of maximally modular. And I worked really hard to do that in my papers, right? So that you didn't have to sort of know what I thought about other things in order to be able to engage with one particular point that I wanted to make. So it's really fun and in some ways kind of self-indulgent to be able to say, well, what I want to know, me personally, and I know no one else in the world is like this, but I want to know, what do I think about all of this stuff, right? And so to be able to sort of, as I put it at the beginning, kind of find the themes and the connection points, the sort of bigger picture that was lurking behind all of these individual little modular pieces, and to be able to put that together in a way that hopefully is successful enough that then people are inclined to engage with it. I think it's just a really fun exercise, and it was really challenging. It was really hard, I thought, much harder than writing the same number of words in article form, because I was trying to sort of create this larger project that, and like I said, I knew where I wanted to end, kind of what most of the upshots I thought that were important from it, and I knew what my starting point was, sort of what I found compelling about the epistemic and epistemic and accidental circumstances that sort of in which science is practiced. But then I kind of I was missing the middle part of like, how do I put all this together in such a way so that people who are not me are willing to spend the effort to sort of work through the hundreds of pages to see what the big picture is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It does. I appreciate you thinking a little bit about that. And so you mentioned one thing in that, contrary to some who take, you mentioned that you believe idealizations to represent a positive representational role. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? So they're doing us a positive. Well, they despite we're not looking for truth, they're looking to simplify complexity. And some might take that as not a good thing, basically. So what is it about idealizations for you that can have this positive role?
Yeah. Okay. So let me say two different things. So what I mean by idealization is playing a positive representational role is that there is representational work going on by incorporating an idealization. It's not simply, in my view, a failure to represent, right? So if there's a population genetic model that does not include does not include population size, and so doesn't include a parameter for drift. How we think about that is it's assuming that the population is infinite size. So in my mind, that's not failing to represent population size. I think that is doing positive representational work in a sense of representing the population as if it were infinite, and that there's something to say about the representational work being done there and the relationship between that representing as if and the world and the audience interest that is epistemically valuable, actually. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I want to say that has more to do with sort of the second part of your question around the value of idealizations is, gather my thoughts. So I said quickly at the end there, I said that idealizations represent as if in an epistemically valuable way, I think, because of, I said quickly, how the world is in audience interests. Mm-hmm. So that second part is an important part, and I think a pretty distinctive part of what I want to say about idealization. So in contrast to some other advocates of the scientific usefulness of idealization, so Michael Strevens comes to mind here, who think that idealizations, when permissible, this comes back to my idea that idealizations are unchecked in some deep sense in their use in science. Some advocates of idealization think that there is a story to tell about sort of how the idealized representation or the idealized assumption itself relates to the world that makes it permissible, right? So this goes back to Michael Weisberg's, right? Either it's a promissory note, and when I can, I'll get rid of that idealization, right? Or, well, I just idealize something that's not causally crucial, right? That's sort of ancillary to the important causes here. Or in his third type of idealization, I idealize population size here, but in my other model, right? Some other scientist down the hall has a model that deals with population size, so that's okay. So in my mind, it's a sort of a circuitous path into the point about the value of idealizations. But in my mind, an idealization like representing a population as if it's infinite in size is warranted. There's certain requirements on the world such that you're able to employ that idealization, I think, but it's not that any of the things that I just attributed to Michael Weisberg. It's not. Sorry, let me focus myself. I'm kind of talking around.
Keep going. Yeah.
I think that what it means when some factor is idealized is not necessarily that it's causally irrelevant, but rather this tells us something about, as I said, some complicated interplay between how the world is and what the audience is interested in. And so this idea really is grounded in just observations that I've made of what happens in population biology. So some of the population biology that I have thought about doesn't include a parameter for drift. And they don't do that because they know the population is really large. They do that because they don't care about the role of drift, right? Mm-hmm. They're focused on figuring out the role of selection, and they sort of are just bracketing the stuff that's not important to the specific pattern that they're trying to grapple with. So I think that maybe if I can try to boil it down, I think that you asked something like, what do I think is positively contributed by idealizations? And I think representing the world as if it were some way it's not is a way of signaling, sort of partitioning off what is focal to some scientific project and what is, possibly just by fiat sort of shoved to the side and rendered sort of less focal, if that makes sense.
Okay. Let's see if I have any other questions. Yeah, I'm very interested. I really do want to read this book. It just came out this year, correct? It's 2018, or
Came out
was
last
it
November?
last November? Okay, so just intending getting reviews.
I do have a newer book though.
Oh, you do? Okay, well,
it's a textbook.
Okay.
This one did just come out.
Oh, is this the Recipes for Science?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Let's so Idealization for the Sciences of Science out now. However, there is another book. The co-written book. Which is, I was actually, as I saw this, I think I was going to recommend it to a friend who will be teaching scientific reasoning in the spring. But
please do that.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Recipes for Science and how this book came about.
So as you mentioned, I wrote this with Corey Wright and Matteo Colombo, and this was initially Corey's project.
Okay.
And he sort of put together a book proposal for it, and then ended up deciding to invite Matteo and I to work on it with him. And it was really interesting, partly because I at least had never worked with either of them before. So it really was sort of this collaboration out of the blue, which I haven't done. I've always known people that I've co-authored with prior to working on a project. And then it's a book-length project, so it's a lot of collaborating. Mm-hmm. But we have, of course, like it sounds like the one that you just referenced, scientific reasoning here at Cincinnati, how science works. And it really felt to me like there was sort of, no offense to anyone who has any books that relate to a class like that, but it felt like there was a hole around how I wanted to teach that sort of a class. And I and my colleagues here at Cincinnati who teach how science works would end up kind of cobbling together different things from different places. So when Corey asked me to get on board, I struggled with the decision because I was right in the midst of this other book and I knew I didn't have time, but I also knew it was not the kind of thing I probably would do by myself. And it's a kind of project that I really believe in. So,
this just came out in September. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I literally got my copies 2 days ago, I think.
Great.
So I'm really excited about it. I mean, part of that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning about my interest in doing my part to sort of make our discipline more involved in sort of the public face of science. And I love the idea of a philosophically nuanced picture of the methods and reasoning patterns in science that nonetheless isn't philosophy of science, right? This is not a book of philosophy of science. We sort of sometimes reference a philosopher or so, but all of the sort of philosophical backdrop is very much kept in the background and sort of minimized as much as possible. But anyway, so I love the idea of our discipline maximizing the extent to which we're part of the education of the scientific education of university students, among others, right?
Yeah.
So at Cincinnati, our course that hopefully will use my book now satisfies the natural sciences gen ed requirement, and I love the idea that somebody who might not take another science course would have something like this as sort of a deep overview of how methods play out across lots of different fields and lots of different kinds of scientific problems. Oh,
this sounds wonderful. Yeah, so to give us a background for here in Indiana, we have our kind of two bread and butter undergrad courses. We have From Plato to NATO, which is a history of science course, kind of an intro to history of science, and then scientific reasoning, which is taught by a variety of either faculty or graduate students. And we typically have used this Ron Geary book, Methods of Scientific Reasoning, which is, people have different opinions on it. And then, maybe perhaps Peter Godfrey Smith's Theory and Reality.
Right.
And that book, I enjoy that book as an introduction to philosophy of science. But it is more of a sort of a general introduction to philosophy of science as opposed to what you and even Geary had done previously. So I'm very motivated to share this with my colleagues and other students who will be teaching this course from here on out. So hopefully they'll take up on it. But yeah, it's been a challenge to decide kind of what to do with this course, whether to have it be a intro to philosophy course or whether, if you're teaching scientific reasoning, how to have a philosophically nuanced approach that is kind kind of appropriately tailored for what it's meant to do.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think it's a huge challenge. I think it's a hard thing to do. Absolutely. And I should mention too that another important book or important resource to add to the list that you created there is John Norton's, I think, work. I think it's really a book maybe that's just explicitly intended for Pitt's How Science Works course, if memory serves. But I, at least in my contributions to this co-authored book, really took a lot of inspiration from certain ways that I think it sounds like that course, and that the book accordingly, a lot of decisions that John Norton has made, right? So, for example, sort of rolling up the sleeves and just doing a lot of statistics, right? As well as sort of trying to get the theory right of at least giving a broad picture of how probability theory underlies the use of statistics.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, no, sure. That is something, I hadn't been familiar with that, but I'm seeing it here now. And I imagine Pitt has a similar kind of course that they're probably using Norton's book. Great. Well, we've chatted for a little while now. Why don't we conclude with our the question I've been asking many of our guests, which is, what do you take to be the greatest challenge facing philosophy of science today?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I want to talk about something that relates to the theme we've already picked up on, but
fantastic.
I don't think it's a challenge, but I think it's an opportunity, and I think it's an opportunity that a lot of philosophers of science are starting to really make deep use of, and that is advertising the strengths of philosophy of science in particular, and our value to not just science, right, but to public conversations about science, and really sort of doing the hard work of finding our way to the table for these various debates. And it seems like this is something that has just seen enormous transformation over the course of, whatever, the 15 years or something I've been involved in the field, counting grad school, of, more and more, it seems like and I don't think it's just that I'm picking up on it more, but more and more it seems like you see philosophers of science, well, here are some random examples. Adrian Curry had a brief reference in this cover story in The Atlantic recently about dissent around the mass extinction at the end of the age of dinosaurs. And then I read Peter Godfrey Smith's response, and I forget what, in some popular venue, I forget what it was, to the octopuses on ecstasy.
God. Et
cetera. And so I feel like more and more you're seeing this sort of the philosophers crop up in these discussions. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity that we overlooked for, getting back to the point about logical empiricism and being a circle that we overlooked for, roughly 100 years.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking in terms of, so advertising, social engagement, there's not a popular philosophy of science sort of like magazine, is there? Like, there's not really something that kind of features, because it's often the case that philosophers of science will contribute to scientific reporting. There's like the Philosopher's Stone in the New York Times, which is sort of like a but there's not really like a designated philosophy column or philosophy of science column necessarily.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right.
It's good to see people,
there are the places to think of. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just curious as to see. And I mean, I don't know if that would be helpful or unique in any way, but it is good. I was just going to agree with you again that it's good to see folks like, coming in these articles and being interviewed, being questioned, having things to say. Yeah.
Seems important.
Okay. But I imagine things like being running the center that is going on at Cincinnati is something we, could be helpful in that regard. Obviously, it's not just on philosophy of science; it's for science in general. So, I guess, is there anything you could say, like, so what is, if folks like myself, other either students or junior faculty at large could, advertise and or promote some social and public engagement, how could they best go about and do that? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think as much as there are sort of leaders in the field who are engaging with this, I think where I see it the most is in graduate students and early career faculty.
Right.
So I think already graduate students and early career philosophers are leading in this regard. So I don't know if I have anything to suggest other than, show us how to do this because it seems like it seems like the new crop of philosophers are amazing in that regard. It's something. I think I credit that with a lot of this transition that we've seen.
Cool. All right. Well, we've reached about the end. Is there anything else you'd like to mention or discuss or plug, perhaps? Anything else?
I don't think so. It seems like it's been a pretty well-rounded conversation from my perspective. Okay.
Well, I would agree. And thank you very much, Angela, for taking the time to chat on this rainy afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your semester. Will you be at the PSA this year?
I will. I will be at the PSA. And you?
Great. I will be there as well. I will be doing a poster that actually represents some of the stuff that I've been doing with this podcast, actually. Excellent. So I hope to see you there and meet you in person at some point.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's really fun. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. All right. Take care. Have a nice afternoon. I'll talk to you soon.
You too.